Hi again then guys, and welcome to another circuit tune for the second to last vehicle of the 1.28 update, the Nissan 300 ZX. Now this car can be a little bit troublesome depending on how heavily you tune the power. In particular, around 800 horsepower going through the rear wheels only. Of course, it's going to be a bit of a handful. I considered doing a couple of different types of tune for it, maybe a drag tune, a drift tune, potentially even a rally build. And I would actually say if you want to try it on the dirt, it's better than you might be expecting. But what I ultimately ended up with is something where the car can be brought under more control and potentially become more useful. Because let's be honest, if you tune this thing up to N300, you're not really going to fare that well against the majority of opponents because you can take it up against those kind of cars. Later on today when I review it, you'll see me doing a race against stuff like the LaFerrari with it. So it can be done, but at the same time, it just feels like you could get more use out of something like this at a slightly lower level, say N300 or N400. Now, as far as the tune itself, I've done just that. I've tuned it to the peak of N300, which is 124% power, dropped the weight as far as it can go, and of course, that'll all be down to the regulations of the room, balance of performance changes everything, etc. Traction control I've got turned off. This car, arguably more so than most of the others in the pack, will definitely vary from player to player as to whether you want that on or not. I've got sport soft tyres to show what it can do under most circumstances, so again, of course, racing tyres will be even grippier, obviously. Suspension we've dropped all the way to 90mm. As far as the frequency, we've got that on 2.05 on the front and the back. Anti-roll I've got all the way up on 8, which is pretty stiff. For the compression on the dampers, we've also increased it a lot up to 66, 92 on the rebound, 1 degree of camber. Now you could give it a little bit more to bring it under more control, but that's what I've opted for. And very rarely I actually have given this tune a little bit of a toe angle, because of course it can come in handy. I just prefer not to use camber and toe unless necessary. With this car though, it is. It is necessary. At least I think so. I've just given it 0.5 toe on the front in particular. That's toe out, of course, and that just makes it a little bit more controlled, and it makes it a little bit less tail happy as well. As far as the diff in particular, I've got the highest initial torque, as you can see, the lowest acceleration and braking settings, and again, as I always say, those settings completely change the kind of car that it is, so of course feel free to try others if you want to. And since it is an N300 tune, not a top speed tune, we've got a modest gearbox setup. So if you do choose to tune it up higher, you will need to extend the gears longer. But for this one, I've got, as you can see, an auto setting of 180 miles per hour, then individual gears of 2150, 1500, 1150, 900, 750, and a 3.7 final drive. So that's what I've done for the setup with an N300 baseline, but you can increase the power, of course, if you want to, and it will still improve the handling even at 500, 600, 700 horsepower. But to prove what it can actually do for racing, of course, let's take it out to our test course of choice, Dragon Trail, to see how it compares to something like, for instance, my N300 Porsche setup. Now, it probably won't come as a surprise to anyone, really, that this is not as quick as my Porsche. Because of course not, it's never going to be as quick as something as OP as a 911 GT3. At the same time though, you could use this one under circumstances maybe where you're up against cars that aren't quite at the Porsche level, or maybe opponents that aren't quite as quick as people who would typically use a Porsche. Now, as a point of reference, this is running a 156 lap in N300, so it certainly isn't slow, but that isn't as quick as the Porsche. That's about 3 to 4 seconds off the pace of my N300 GT3. So, as I said, it's not as quick, nowhere near on this kind of circuit, but the 300 ZX is more the kind of car that I would actually recommend using for lower classes, yes, N300, N400, but on tracks which you can actually use it's really impressive straight line speed on, because for mid-range and especially top-end acceleration and top speed, it's a really good car. It's very quick for its power, it's just very slippery as well, and as you can see from the replay, I'm still getting the tail out through corners. That's something which is just kind of part of the car's personality to some degree, like it would be with an RX-7 or an S chassis Nissan as well. Not to say that it's a bad handling car, not by any means. Even on sports tyres it's very easy to control. I will say though that you do need to make sure that you brake a little bit earlier than in something like a Porsche. And again, of course, racing brakes would help out a lot, but as the case is, you just have to learn to use the car a little bit differently. So overall, if you do decide to use this tune, I hope you have a ton of fun with it, potentially win races with it as well, or even repurpose it for a different class if you feel the need. But click here on screen to see all of my other GT Sport tune setups as well if you want to check those out, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.